This subject's a lot more serious, and to start off, Lisa, you want to just stand up, or just want to raise your hand? Or Lisa's son was killed in a crash, and that puts a different cast on the whole story. For me, I feel like I'm continuing my father's detective work, but for people like Lisa and for the eyewitnesses, many of whom have remained stalwart over time, the whistleblowers within the investigation, these people have put a lot on the line, and there's more and more of them. Since I started promoting this book about a month ago, I've had about 2 people a day come out and want to talk to me, and some at extremely high levels, and with incredible inside information. One of whom, for instance, was the air traffic controller who manned the screen that night. And he told me, he said, hey, yeah, we saw an object vertically intersect TWA 800's flight path, and then TWA 800 disappeared from the screen. That's how deep this goes. But I'm going to start at an unusual place, and that is at the 9/11 hearings in 2004. I'm going to come back around to that place. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but there was about several months of hearings on and off, public hearings, and among the first people to talk was George Tenet. He was the holdover CIA director from the Clinton administration. He held over to Bush administration. Mistake on Bush's part, but that's one of several. And he's testifying, and they said to him, why weren't we prepared for September 11th? Why weren't we able to see this coming? And he told them, and he's the first one to introduce this, he said it was the wall. He said there was this is his phrase, ironclad regulations that prevented the CIA and the FBI from sharing information. And he said even within the FBI, the intelligence gatherers and the prosecutors couldn't talk to each other. He said ironclad regulations, that was the reason. Several other people repeated that. The wall, the wall, the wall. Keep that in mind. Basic part of the story, many of you remember it. Maybe some of you were out on Long Island that night. But the plane, 747, takes off from JFK, 230 people on board, and it's at 8:19 and at 8:31, thousands of people on the popular shore of Long Island, South Shore, see it get blown out of the sky. That is what they knew that night, instantly. But then the air traffic controllers immediately talked to the FAA. The FAA sent the information to Washington, and within a half hour, Richard Clark, the anti-terror czar, was calling a meeting in the Situation Room of the White House. It's never happened before on a domestic airplane crash. I have a friend who was in the White House that night. His name's Colonel Buzz Patterson. I don't know if you remember him, but he carried the nuclear football for the president that summer. So he had, of course, the highest security clearance and was very close, not close emotionally, but he was close physically to the Clintons. He said they remained upstairs in the family quarters. I know they were there from Hillary's logs. They arrived at 8:35, just minutes after the plane blew up. Panetta calls them at 9 o'clock, the chief of staff, and says, there's a problem. And I said, did they leave the family quarters? He said, no. I said, who was in the family quarters with them? And he could only name one name. Keep this name in mind. Sandy Berger, okay? He's the deputy national security advisor. The Clintons had a way of putting their person into the number 2 spot. So in the national security, it was the number 2 guy, Berger, not Tony Lake, who got the inside information. And at Justice Department, it wasn't figurehead Janet Reno, it was her deputy, Jamie Gorelick. Remember that name? At the CIA, it wasn't the head, John Deutsch, who actually had some credentials, but his sub-second in command, who was a political guy, that was George Tenet, who came up through, staff work. Now, so immediately there is a buzz. In the first 6 hours, 2, 4, 6, 8 hours, people are openly talking about how the missile struck the plane, took it out. MSNBC bought an amateur video, ran it 2 or 3 times before the FBI pulled it. Hundreds of people have seen that. I talked to a guy who was a 747 pilot, laid up in a Hong Kong hospital with a back surgery. His wife had come over. They're both there. They watched it 50 times because they didn't take it off Hong Kong TV. He says, I know exactly what I saw. And what he saw was what all the eyewitnesses saw, and that is they all say the same thing. See this object come up off the horizon, it looks like a flare, fireworks, red tip, smoky contrail, arcs up, over, arcs, zigzags, boom, blows the plane out of the sky. White flash, white flash, white flash, down, flaming fireball. This is what the eyewitnesses said. Now, how many eyewitnesses were there? Within hours of the crash, the FBI was put on this job illegally. They have no authority to do this. That's the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board's job. But they did it publicly. What we've since discovered, though, and this is probably the newest and most interesting revelation in the book, is that night, by the next morning, we have a treasure trove of CIA documents we've been able to unearth. We know step by step by step by step now. Remember that wall? There was no wall. Day one, CIA was on the job. They admit as much. The Director of Intelligence involved itself in the, quote, missile theory on day one. They admit as much. Now on July 30th, which is 13 days after the crash, the CIA analyst meets with the FBI missile team. At this point, the missile team is still trying to do a good job. CIA never was trying to do a good job. They had one role. That was to make all missile talk go away. Now, they got it off the table, but the FBI rather, was still investigating missiles. So in the July 30th meeting, the FBI missile team fellow says, hey, listen, here's what we know. We're about ready to put out a report. We've interviewed, and this is just 2 weeks, 144 excellent eyewitnesses. The evidence is overwhelming. It's too consistent for it to be anything but a surface-to-air missile, and the people we've interviewed are mainly professionals. In fact, several of them were military, helicopter pilots, airline pilots, fishermen, other people who knew something about what they were seeing. The CIA analyst, in his memo, boasts to his boss he tried to talk the FBI out of going public with his report. And he succeeds. Because on August 17th now we're 1 month after the crash, the FBI speaks to the New York Times about eyewitnesses. It's the first time the New York Times has mentioned eyewitnesses. The New York Times was the exclusive recipient of FBI information. So if it didn't come through the New York Times, it didn't come anywhere. They were doing 4 or 6 stories a day. This is the #1 news story in 1996. So here's what the August 17th article tells the readers of the New York Times, who are maybe the most ignorant people in America today. If that's what they read, they don't know anything about almost anything. Now, he tells them, the FBI agent, and whoever the guy is, he's not named, he says, we've been out interviewing witnesses, and there are only a handful, he says, of credible eyewitnesses. And they produce one eyewitness for the New York Times to talk to. His name is Michael Russell, good guy, good eyewitness. He's an engineer on a scavenge ship. He looks up at the corner of his eye and sees a bright white flash. He doesn't have a chance to see the contrail, the ascending object. And so they conclude, the FBI's conclusion is, well, this is a bomb because it's a bright white flash. Plane falls right out of the sky. It's a high explosion, which a soft yellow explosion is a fuel tank. This is a bomb. So the New York Times takeaway is this lessens totally the chances that a missile took out the plane and almost assuredly guarantees that it was a bomb. And we've all but ruled out mechanical failure. This is 1 month to the day after the thing. Now, the FBI is now in the bomb track. The Clinton administration is willing, apparently, at this time to live with a bomb. There's no politics mentioned in any of these stories at all. No sense of how it influences the election, except that Clinton is taking, the Times is praising him for his tough talk about law and order, about putting new bomb detection devices, blah, blah, blah. Now, on August 23rd, there are 2 headlines in the New York Times. Above the fold right, prime evidence that explosive device destroys cabin of TWA 800. There's PETN on the plane. There's RDX, all these elements of a bomb or missile. They're pointing it towards a bomb, but no doubt that it's a bomb or a missile. Above the fold left, Clinton signs welfare reform bill on eve of Democratic National Convention. And one of those headlines had to go. and it was this one. On August 23rd, that same day, the day before actually, Jim Kallstrom, the head of the FBI operation, is called to Washington for the first time to meet with the woman who's going to be yanking his chains for the next 16 months, Jamie Gorelick, the Deputy Attorney General. And from that day on, Kallstrom's a changed man. And I'm not sure what the carrots and sticks are. I think I know what one carrot is. I don't know what the sticks were. But he was a changed, defeated, different person. He has been for the last 20 years. And Lisa's confronted him, and she'll verify this if you talk to her. He's been living with this lie for 20 years. But for whatever reason, he made that choice. And he would, to validate it, he would lie even when he didn't have to lie. And he continues to do it to this day. So that day, 23rd, that same day that the headline appears, they begin a search for a plane, an airport, somewhere in the world, where on that day that Flight 800 was parked there, the TWA 800 plane, there was a dog training exercise. Because they were reasoning that if we could prove that a dog had been trained on the 800 plane and left explosive traces in the training, that would explain our month of reporting of explosive traces, PETN and RDX. So it takes them about 4 weeks. And then an article, the FBI puts out a press release saying, dog training exercise on Flight 800 plane in St. Louis 6 weeks before the crash. Then the next day, the New York Times weighs in. Yes, this explains it all. This officer and his dog Carlo had these training aids filled with explosives, and they were leaking, and he was spilling them all over the plane, and that ends the story. The investigators, the serious ones, were crushed. They said, "How can we ever take this to court now?" You know. Well, the officer is named Burnett, and the first person in the media to talk to him was me in 2002. The New York Times never talked to him. The FBI did not talk to them before they put out their press release and ran the story. And as he told me, and excuse the language, he goes, "I am pissed off to this day." He's a black guy. He took this very personally, Herman Burnett. And he's like a regular St. Louis police officer doing dog training exercises. Well, here's what the Times knew instantly, is that the composition of the training aids doesn't match the PETN or RDX found on the plane. And the fact that, there was PETN found on the wing of the plane, which is not exactly in Carlo's skill set to go in and find that. The placements were entirely different. The composition was different. But here's the real killer element of the story, is that all that Burnett put on his form was wide body and time, right? Because this was never correlated. So the time starts at 10:45, ends at 12:15. Now the FBI admits that the 800 plane left the gate at 12:30. What they don't admit is that there are 400 people on board going to Hawaii. And Burnett performed his exercise in a perfectly sterile environment. That is, no one's on board. And they got away with it. They killed the investigation on that day, 2 months after the crash. After that, 1 month later, Pierre Salinger comes out with something very close to the truth, and the New York Times uses 4 separate headlines to humiliate him. He didn't fully have his information tight, but he was on the right track. I know the guys who supplied him with the information. They're still around, because the information came out of the Air Traffic Control Center in New York. And then it was backed up by other information. So that's where that sat. For the next, between November of 96 and November of 97, the CIA went about its job, that is, dealing with the one bit of evidence that they could not hammer away. FBI agents were caught hammering evidence in the locker, sending away to the FBI lab in Washington, never seeing it again, subtracting, deleting, playing with the black boxes, which they found 8 days after the crash in 120 feet of water with the pingers going off from day one. They were taken and put back and edited. They had nothing to say, either one of them, at the end. And this went on for months. But now that we have the CIA documents, we know what they were doing. We know how they did it. And it's impressively diabolical. If only the CIA could be this effective against our enemies as they are against us. For instance, I got a call, I'll just back this up a little bit. And I started working on this project. We did a documentary in 2001, and I did another book with James Sanders in 2003. And in 2009, I'm in my office in Kansas City, and I get a call from this woman, and she goes, Jack, this is Witness 73. Do you know who I am? I said, yes, I do. I said, upside down Nike swoosh, right? She goes, that's right. I said, hers was probably the best testimony of all. She's a travel professional with an interest in aviation. She has no reason to lie. Her two in-laws on the beach with her refused to talk to the FBI, and they were appalled that she did. But she was trying to do the right thing. She said she had been following 800 as it moved across the sky, and she wondered why it wasn't ascending more quickly. And it was actually on a holding pattern because the plane was passing up ahead. And then she says she sees this object come up off the horizon. And she described it as everyone else does, except her description is perfect. Red tip, smoky gray contrail. She follows it very closely. She obviously has good eyesight. She says it gets up close, it arcs over at the last second. That's the upside-down Nike swoosh. She said it explodes at the right wing. Then she said it blows the nose of the plane off. And then the rest of the plane, lumbers on for a minute, then falls into a fireball into the sea. Now, it would take the NTSB and the FBI at least 3 or 4 weeks before they were able to verify that the nose came off from the debris field, because they didn't know. She had it exactly right. They go out to her home in North Carolina. They interview her. She tells them that. At this time, the FBI is trying to do a good job. And so I had read her statement very carefully. And then I said to her, I said, why is it then, and she told me her name. I don't use it because the only reason she was talking to me was because she was in a St. Joseph, Missouri hospital with her husband who was dying of cancer, and he hated the idea that she'd ever talk to the FBI. So she was only willing now to talk. And there are many more people who saw this and talked about it. So I said, why are you telling me this? I said, what happened with that second interview when they went back the second time? And it said here, you told them now you're drinking Long Island iced tea cocktails before you saw this. And she goes, well, there's something about that you ought to know. I said, what's that? She goes, I don't know what a Long Island iced tea cocktail is. And then I said, and well, could it have been another drink? And she said, no. You sure? I said, yeah. She goes, I don't drink at all. And then she said, there's something else you ought to know. I said, what's that? She goes, there was no second interview. And I said, there's something you ought to know. And she said, what's that? I said, you're not the only one. There are at least 3 key eyewitnesses, I'm sure there's many more, whose testimony was so clear, so precise, that they had to go back and invent new witness statements. For instance, there was one holdout on the FBI missile team who refused to buckle onto the CIA. The CIA was running this investigation. The FBI seemed to be, but the CIA had the upper hand. They knew the White House had their back. The FBI was going along for the dumb show. One FBI guy, though, refuses to back down. And, he must have caught a lot of grief even within his own bureau. And he meets with the FBI, the CIA rather, on April 29th, 1997. Keep that date in mind. And he says to them, he goes, I don't buy this. He said, I don't buy what you're trying to sell us at all. Because what the CIA by this time had concluded was that what the eyewitnesses saw, and there would end up being 258 eyewitnesses who saw a missile, what they thought was a missile or a flare or firework. Many of them used the word missile, although they'd lie about that. He said, I don't buy this. He said, we have 8 people who said they saw the missile hit the plane. And now you're trying to tell us that what they saw instead was the planes flying along, spontaneous fuel tank explosion, knocks the head off. They now acknowledge that. And then it turns upright like a rocket and zooms 3,500 feet more into space and confuses the eyewitnesses into thinking they saw a missile. And every aviator in the country laughed at that. They said, that's absolutely, totally incredible. I've read all 750 witness statements. No one saw it rise. Even remember the early FBI witness that they gave up, the guy who saw the bright white flash, he said it fell right out of the sky. The other pilots, right out of the sky. Whether they saw a missile or not, they all said right out of the sky. But in the CIA version, it goes up 3,500 feet, confuses all these eyewitnesses, military people, helicopter pilots, airline pilots, fishermen, into thinking it was a missile. And but the FBI lone holdout wasn't taking it. He said, no, that wasn't that. He said 8 people said it was it hit the airplane. They saw it hit the airplane. At least 30 people saw the object coming in the opposite direction of TWA Flight 800. So it couldn't be that, And then at that time, the CIA guy you kind of brushed him off. But on that same day, April 29th, 1997, is the same day that witness number 73's new witness statement shows up in her FBI file. They added it that day because they knew they had to sell that story. I'm going to get ahead just for a second, then I'd rather turn this over to questions and answers, and we'll do that in a sec. This charade continues for months. George Tenet is on it early. Now he's the head of the CIA because they got rid of Deutsch. You know what Deutsch did? He took his computer home and was looking at his emails at home on his computer. And they arrested him, head of the CIA. Can you believe that? I mean, incredible. One other eyewitness that I'll tell you about is kind of interesting. On November 1997, the FBI is wrapping up its case. They're closing the criminal case, and they showed the animation that the CIA created of this bizarre missile zoom climb. And watching at home, a fellow who's become a good friend of mine since. His name's Mike Wire. And what he doesn't realize at the time is they're basing this whole thing on his testimony. And his name is Wire. His last name is W-I-R-E. And so he watches and says, I didn't say anything like this. But he doesn't know how intimately involved he's been in this thing. Now, several years go by, and they only show this once. At the NTSB hearing the next month, there is no talk of witnesses. They're not allowed to testify, first time ever. They don't show the animation. That's the only time it's ever been shown. Media bought it. Well, they didn't question it. And then Accuracy in Media. And I did a press conference with Accuracy in Media last week. They've been great on this. Reed Irvine, I don't know if you remember him from back then. He's looking through the witness statements finally become public about 4 years after the fact. And he's looking through them, and he sees in this one that the name, usually they redact all the names so you can't track these people down. But Wire's name is there with a small W. They missed it. So Irvine says, I wonder if that's a name. And it says where he's from. Generally, he's from Bucks County. So he goes around searching for him, and he finds out that, yes, Wire is the guy who, there was the man on the bridge who saw this. So what they do, Irvine then, is he shows him a document that also became public then. It was a document of the NTSB's grilling of the CIA about this animation. This took place 3 years after the fact, or 2 years after the animation was shown. And the NTSB had been shut out of this altogether. The bosses at the NTSB were playing along, but some of the participants, like from TWA and Boeing and whatnot, were asking hard questions. They said, did anyone see? We've looked at all these witness statements. No one that we see, and his witness statements saw the plane go up, as you said it did. He goes, well, they said, the CIA guy who's I think improvising on the spot says, well, yeah, one guy did. And he said, who was that? He said, it was the man on the bridge. And he said, true. He goes, in his first interview, he said he thought he saw coming up off the beach, zigzag out, arc over, blah, blah, blah. But when we sent the FBI out back to interview him again, in his second interview, he admitted, no, it wasn't on the beach. He first saw it about 20 degrees up, about, where you put one flagpole up above a house, right above there. And yeah, it could have been the missile. I mean, it could have been the airplane in crippled flight. I mean, that makes sense. And so they told him this, and the NTSB guys are getting cut off by their own bosses. They can't hardly pursue this. So Reed Irvine finds Mike Wire and says, tell me about that second interview. And Mike Wire says, of course, there was no second interview. I can tell you what I saw as clear as I saw the first day. And then I've since found a third guy. And this was a Navy Master Chief who was flying overhead. They changed, you could see it. And the documents The FBI documents have it going from right to left. So it's intersecting TWA Flight 800. They changed it from left to right. They did this time after time. We've only caught 3, but these are 3 of most key eyewitnesses. And with that, they essentially killed the investigation. And now, I'll just close with this, and then we'll, actually 2 things. On the 5th anniversary, no, this would have been, let's jump ahead a little. I'll close with the 9/11 hearings, because this is priceless. Just the way, in terms of motive. In 2013, an excellent documentary came out called TWA Flight 800. I wasn't involved with it, but it's produced by Tom Stalkup and Christina Borges, and they've been on this forever. She used to be a CBS producer who got fired for pushing this too hard. And so it got enough attention that I was invited on CNN's morning show with Allison Kozik to talk about it. And the way these things work is you get 5 minutes. They put on their guy who's going to, call you a conspiracy theorist, whatever. And so we're talking about a minute left, and Kozik says to me, "Okay, Jack," that's why they talk to you. "If it was a missile, who shot it?" And they can't even hide their patronizing, Why did they shoot it? And why the cover-up? And I said, "Allison, I got a minute. I'll go right to the cover-up." I said, "This was Bill Clinton's Benghazi moment." I said he had a national security disaster take place on his watch, and all he wanted to do was kick that can down the road past November. And he succeeded. And I said, and just as Barack Obama apparently succeeded in Benghazi. "Oh, well, thank you, Jack." Well, next day I go to find the transcript, and they've edited out my answer. This is the way the media roll. They just edited it right out, as though I didn't say that. But it was Bill Clinton's Benghazi moment. That's why this all happened, and nothing to do with national security. When we get back in, I'll save it for later as to who did the firing, but many of you probably know. Let's go back to the 9/11 hearings. Let's follow the career of one Jamie Gorelick. She's the Deputy Attorney General. She's the one running the investigation. She's the one overseeing the collaboration of the FBI and the CIA. In May of that year, 97, after 8 would have had to be pretty arduous months, she keep waiting for the current equivalent of Woodward and Bernstein to show up at her doorstep. That was then, not today. She gets a job, the most plum job in Washington, for which she has no experience at all. It's vice chairman of Fannie Mae. Over the next 6 years, she will make $25 million, and while helping to destroy that agency. And then in a great burst of patriotism, she leaves that position to take one of 5 Democratic positions on the 9/11 Commission, right? And so George Tenet talks about the wall. Richard Clark talks about the wall. All her toadies talk about the wall. Sandy Berger talks about the wall. And then John Ashcroft, Attorney General, Republican, is late in this conversation. And he says, full disclosure, and they ask him, why September 11th? What allowed it to happen? He goes, the single greatest reason for 9/11 was the wall. We were not allowed to communicate with the CIA. And then he says, in the spirit of full disclosure, I have to tell you that the author of that memo is sitting on this panel. It was Jamie Gorelick. She writes the memo. She oversees the collaboration of CIA and FBI and the subversion of the 800 investigation. And then she walks away from it all with $25 million. It must be great to be a friend of the Clintons, unless you end up in Fort Marcy Park or someplace, but it's otherwise. There's a lot I haven't told you. The rest of the story is in the book, but let's just turn it over to questions now, if you got some. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. My niece led the applause here.
How did Jamie Gorelick engineer her appointment onto the 9/11 panel?
Well, what happened is the Democrats got to choose 5, and the Republicans got to choose 5. The Republicans picked all these good citizen types, sort of milquetoasty, Tom Keene types. He was the chairman. Former governor, right, New Jersey, right? But the type. The Democrats put all hardball players on there. Ben Veniste was, a Watergate guy. Lee Hamilton, he's the head Democrat. He was a former congressman. A month, right after he steps down from 9/11 Commission, he goes to work for Sandy Berger. This is after Sandy Berger got busted in the archives stealing information, which I am highly confident that it was involved with 800 and related subjects. But that's how they did it. That's the way they've always done it. And Republicans play softball, Democrats play hardball. Excuse me? Well, yes and no. I mean, you're here. I mean, you're fighting back. Everyone has to do it individually, and that's and we all have that burden. In the age of social media, we're all producers of information. So even if you only tell 10 people and you convince them, you're fighting back. I tell you, I think if it weren't for social media, they would, because now the major media is so utterly, astonishingly, bizarrely, pathetically corrupt that if it weren't for social media, we'd be living in Orwellian land right now. But that much said, it just frustrates them madly that they can't control all the information. And even if they could edit out my answer, on CNN, but then I wrote an article the next day saying, hey, you edited out my answer, They put it back in. Yes, ma'am.
So who shot it down?
Well, that's a good question. Here it is. I tell you with 100% confidence the plane was shot down. Okay, 100%. There's no doubt. I would say with that 95, 98% confidence, the U.S. Navy was involved in the shooting down of the airplane. Accident. What wasn't accidental was the cover-up, and nor could the Navy have done that, or would they have done that. That had to come from the absolute top. There's a lot of information now that I put in the book that really is overwhelming. It's hard not to see that their involvement. What I don't do in the book is try to get into explaining exactly what missile it was, where it hit, because those are questions that if I'm wrong, someone's going to hop all over me. So I just take it as far as the information I have. But the giveaway really was this. Hovering right above the plane when it exploded was a Navy P-3, which is a surveillance plane, and it was used at the time among sub-hunting and various other things. But, there are documents at the time available, technical manuals, I'd seen them. They were available to anyone in the media to look at the time. The P-3 played the central role in what was called the cooperative engagement capability. There would be the combatants in these exercises included ships and subs, and the P-3 relayed information among them. And there were 3 subs and 1 cruiser in the immediate vicinity of the crash site. There was a P-3 with its transponder off, so it couldn't be read by, the air traffic control, right above TWA 800. And the New York Times never mentioned the P-3. Pierre Salinger knew about it. The guys who gave him the information knew about it within days. He never knew about it, or they never talked about it. Yes, sir.
How could the Navy be doing maneuvers on a major flight path in the United States? That was
Right.
That was a major flight path out of one of the largest airports in the United States.
Yes. Here's what we also know now, and this is why I'm much more confident of this thesis. I didn't want to come to that conclusion. I'd be much happier if it was a terrorist, whatever, But on the 7th of, and there may have been a terrorist element in it. I won't rule that out. But on the 7th, in the CIA documents, we learned that many, many people had seen what was an apparent missile test on July 7th. I've heard from some more people since the book came out, telling me they said, Mr. Castro, I don't know if this matters, but on July 7th we were camping and I saw these things that look like missiles go up. No, that does matter because that's what happened. Here's what also happened. On July 12th, and we have the video now, we have the video of a missile test off the coast of Long Island on July 12th. Now, we knew that the FBI and CIA had talked about this video when they talked about people thinking they saw an object come up. But what they don't say in those documents is the fact that after it reaches its peak, we see burning debris coming out of the sky. It's likely it was either a drone or another missile or something. These tests were being run. They were testing the cooperative engagement capability. Here's where terrorism comes into play. This was 2 days before the start of the Olympics. Ramzi Youssef was on trial that day in New York City. They were at the highest state of alerts Navy since the Cuban Missile Crisis. there is real possibility, and I don't rule this out at all because I keep hearing it from military sources, that they were concerned and they had reason to believe that a charter plane filled with explosives was in the process of attacking New York City, and that that plane may have been in that mix. I just say that the missiles were the Navy's, but it may have been done to take out a terrorist. Today, just 2 days ago, I heard from a very good source that was what happened. And again, that's why I draw back from saying exactly what happened, because I don't know exactly what happened. And I've heard from people involved, but it was so compartmentalized, even on board a Navy ship. Person X knows this, no Y knows this. But the person who pulled the trigger, they're quiet. They haven't talked to me. Yes, ma'am.
In today's paper, it said it was a spark that caused an explosion.
And it's pathetic that...
The Ahmadiyya is a Jewish newspaper, so they're pretty good on their reporting.
Yeah, this is the only paper that did it justice so far is, well, two. One is the New York Star Ledger had a nice article yesterday. And the other was the UK Daily Mail. You know, the Newsday has been pathetic in their reporting. What happened after 4 years, the NTSB had to say something, you know. So the best they could come up with was, well, maybe there was a spark of some sort of unknown origin in the fuel tank, which blew the plane up. In the last month, I've been getting 2 or 3 emails a day from guys saying, you know, I worked on in fuel tanks all my life. I've walked around 747 fuel tanks. I know them upside down. There's no wiring in there. You know, this is impossible. Remember what they did with the 747s after they came up with the conclusion where they grounded them all and they grounded the 747, the Air Force One. Remember that? No, neither do I, because it didn't happen. Still hasn't happened. It was pathetic. It was almost as bad as the CIA Zoom climb. No one believes it. I'm an honorary member of the TWA Museum. I speak to TWA groups. No one disagrees with me. This is the rare conspiracy theory where every knowledgeable person is on one side of the argument. Yeah, run it.
The other thing is that while we were there as families during the recovery, the assumption was that it was a bomb or missile, even when the Clintons came in the day of the opening of the Atlanta Olympics and met with the families.
Right.
We were being told that it was a bomb or a missile, and they were trying to figure things out. James Kallstrom was, front and center of that back then.
And that must be for me, that's why I think Kallstrom will be the one person to crack. At least I hope he does. Because he's the public face. He's the one who met with all those family members. Yeah. No. Right. In fact, I know one family member who said it was a missile. And then she said, but if you ever repeat this, I'm going to deny I said it, Yeah, because the fuel tank, a month into the crash, the New York Times ran an article saying the FBI, the AFBI's or NTSB has essentially ruled out any possibility of a mechanical malfunction. Because the fuel tank, they said, blew up 30 seconds after the first explosion. And they were right. Then they just decided they had to have a mechanical malfunction for some reason. And the aviation community is deeply cynical about this. You could, if you know an airline pilot or mechanic, ask him about this. He'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you right now. They're not going to believe you. That's why this is the most spectacularly successful cover-up in American history. It just amazes me they got away with this, or have gotten. Run it.
One more question, that is, how did this all intersect with TWA as a flight carrier just disappearing?
Well, yeah, that's a good question, because when I speak to TWA groups, they're angry. The first time I showed the video in 2001, and I showed it to an audience of TWA pilots and mechanics, and that's a tough audience, because everyone in that room knows more about aviation than I do. And the one guy just leaped up. He was a pilot. He goes, follow the money, because the airline went bankrupt. People say, why did Boeing roll over? Well, Boeing's easy. Boeing's in the middle of a merger with McDonnell Douglas when this happens, right? If the merger goes through, Boeing will get essentially 100% of the American commercial airline market. So Boeing plays along, and some months later, in early '97, the Justice Department approves the merger between McDonnell Douglas and Boeing. A week earlier, that same Justice Department turned down the highly controversial merger between Office Depot and Staples, which would have given them 8% lock on the critical office supply market. Same Justice Department. That's what they're saying. What the people at TWA tell me is that they were in financial trouble when this happened, and that the payoff was a bunch of new airplanes. And I've tried talking to their CEO at the time, who knows something, and he will simply not. He's among the many people who will not return my phone call. So, yes, ma'am. They didn't, but that was a right. And here's an interesting detail. Right, that was done to actually. They did that initially because Clinton was talking about that as early as August the 2nd to push it back past November. That was part of that deal. The fellow who was in charge of reconstructing that plane is now the chief whistleblower on the side of justice. He fully believes now that that the plane was shot down. And he was the guy who reconstructed the airplane. His name's Hank Hughes. If you've seen that documentary, he's a principal figure in it. No, it was done just for show. It wasn't anything. Because if you look at it, there's holes in it, and there's, and if it's a proximity fuse, it's not even going to show up. Missiles. These missiles don't necessarily hit the plane. They could blow up outside the plane. And all they had to do was shake up the fuel tank, get it vaporized, and then any spark is going to set it off. The fuel tank does blow up, but the fuel tank blows up when the plane is falling out of the sky. And that's what everyone sees, the big fireball that emerges. No, I mean, there's not enough there to see or not see that. Plus, on one occasion, Hank Hughes, the NTSB guy who's rolled over, who's come on to the good guy's side, he said he came in one night, parts were missing from the airplane. And so what he did one night is he set up a sting. He set up a video. And he found two FBI agents at 3 a.m. hammering the metal. Because it was important that if it was outside, the metal would bow in. They needed certain pieces of it to bow out. That's how corrupt this whole thing was. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Well, actually, it was through the Freedom of Information Act. And the first person to get it was Tom Stalkup, the guy who did the documentary. And then an attorney, John Clark, went in and got it because Stalkup keeps his stuff to himself. And then he posted it online. What was curious about this, when I was doing the research on this, and when I was reading this, it's like, being the first person in on the California American River in Sacramento, it's like nuggets all over the place. It's just incredible, including the admission by the CIA that the plane could never have gone up more than 14,000 feet. So in other words, they knew even before the thing was shown that it was a crock. But when you go in and find this stuff, it just really boggles the mind, and it's all there. The challenge is to get, to me, the real villain in this whole piece is the media. They're the only ones, the CIA did what the CIA does. The FBI played along. The governments are corrupt. That's why we have a Constitution to channel that and corral that corruption. But the media, particularly the New York Times, totally betrayed their craft, and they do it to this day. I can't tell you the conversations I've had with, I've had them before on other subjects, and I walk, finally, when I got, Paul Molshine did a nice piece in the Star Ledger yesterday, if you saw that. But here's how I got him. I said, I can get you the eyewitnesses. I can get you the whistleblowers. I can get your family members. I can get you NTSB board members. All you got to do is call them, And that's what he did. He followed through and he called them. And then he said, wow, this is not the ordinary run-of-the-mill conspiracy theory. But Newsday? It reminds me of that Randy Travis song. Is it over? Are we still through? If my phone still ain't ringing, can I assume it still ain't you? That's the way I felt with the media. Coming up to July 17th, I got not one single unprompted phone call from any media person. Newsday, New York Post, all these papers in the especially metropolitan area, they were running stories, and they just run like there was rehashing it out of Wikipedia. That's how bad it is. But what's going to happen now? Is there any hope? And the question is, maybe. If video weren't running, I would tell you something. I'll just give you a hint at it, even if it is running. I had lunch in Washington last week with a a former member of the NTSB board member, a former member of the NTSB. There's only 5 board members at a time, so it's a pretty prestigious position. And there was a guest at lunch whose prominence shocked me. It shocked me that he would meet with me. I can't mention names, but nor do I'm not overly optimistic that something will come of it. But he's got the book, he's got a signed copy. And so there are other things. And today, for instance, I got Accuracy Media out of Washington still does a great job on stuff. And I was on a conference call earlier at my sister's house, in fact. And the person I was talking to, his first name is Ace, right? Which tells you something about his background. He's a retired admiral. And he wants to get at the bottom of this. He's totally convinced the Navy did it. And he said, I got the name of the admiral, or the captain, rather, of the one known ship in that area. He goes, I'm calling him. He said, do you want me to call him, or do you want me or him? I said, you call him. He's not going to answer my phone calls. You call him. So what's happening now is I'm getting this bubbling up from the bottom. As long as I keep this out in public and people have a conduit, they could. And if you know someone in this area, everyone knows someone who knows someone. I've talked to several New Jersey fishermen, who have really good information. And my website is just cashel.com. I very cleverly forgot to bring any cards with me, so I don't have any to give out. But just go to my website, cashel.com, and it will tell you how to reach me. And especially if you know someone with inside information. And like I said, I've been hearing from one person a day who knows something. I've talked to at least 100 airline pilots, at least 50 mechanics. Yeah, Mike?
Why did Calcium crack? Where did they have him again? What did they do to him? I mean, it sounds like an episode of X-Files.
Yeah, it does. In fact, I just started watching X-Files about 2 months ago, and I'm saying, man, this sounds awfully familiar. In the book, I talk about the carrot that they offered him. And it's this. His best friend in the FBI is a guy named Lynn DeVecchio. And DeVecchio had been revealed by 3 of his fellow FBI officers to be sort of the John Connolly to Greg Scarpa's Whitey Bulger. The informant who knows too much and gives too much information out and helps his guy, Greg Scarpa, assist him in his assassinations. Greg Scarpa killed more than 50 people. He was in very deep trouble. He had been under a Justice Department investigation. And it was at best he was going to lose his job and his pension. At worst he was going to prison like Connolly for 50 years in Boston. If you saw any of the Whitey Bulger stuff. So what happens though is that Kallstrom rolls over at the end of August, and the very beginning of September, the Justice Department decides it has nothing on DeVecchio. So he's allowed to retire with his full pension. However, the state of New York was upset about this, and they tried DeVecchio for murder some years later. By this time, Kallstrom is now the special assistant to Pataki in New York as terror czar or whatever, And he becomes his chief fundraiser and proponent. I'm thinking, the state of New York is trying one guy for murder, and yet the state of New York is hiring another guy who's his major fundraiser. This seems like a conflict of interest to me. But I think the DeVecchio thing was the carrot. But I think there's more to it than that. That's one. Let's just take maybe one more question, because I think you guys want to get back and watch the convention. And is that fair? And I'll stick around later if you want to buy some of my books. They're just $20, by the way. It's about a 40% discount. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you made mention, I believe, within the several videos of the launch of a possible.
Yeah, we have a video of a missile test on July 12th, and we've confirmed. But the July 17th video is the holy grail of this investigation. In fact, when James Sanders, who was my partner on the earlier projects, and he and his wife had been arrested, in fact, and convicted of conspiracy for his reporting early on, along with their pilot source in the investigation. That's another whole story. But he sent me the video. He goes, Jack, I got the video. Just last year. It was a Freedom of Information Act. I got the video. I got, what video? The video. It's of the missile shooting the plane down, blah, blah, blah. So I said, well, let me take a look at that. So he sent it to me. Fortunately, he sent it to me because I was the only person in America who could have told him what was what. because I had just been reading the FBI document about the July 12th missile video. And because you can hear on the July 12th video, a fellow who's the videographer saying, hey, it looks like a rocket going up, right? So I'm watching Jim's video, and here I hear the guy, hello, it looks like a rocket going up. I said, oh, no, this ain't it. And then what I did is I checked, this is the beauty of the internet, a thing called, there's a big moon up. And I called it's called Moon Page. And it tells you exactly where the moon is, what it looks like on a given day and time. So then I had to call Jim back. I was going to break his heart with this, I said, it still has a lot of evidentiary value, but it's not what he thought it was. I said, Jim, I hate to break this to you, but that's not that's not the Holy Grail. We know a video was taken. We know the FBI seized it. Nelson DeMille wrote his novel Nightfall around it. He goes, no, it is, because I checked the moon. I checked the moon. It's a new moon, right? I said, yeah, but I hate to break it to you, but the moon on July 12th is waxing. This one's waxing. The moon on July 17th was waning, and it was that close. Plus the guy saying it was a rocket. But the Holy Grail is that video that an amateur videographer took. I've talked to hundreds of people who saw it that night. MSNBC had been on the air for 2 days. They bought it, apparently in some bidding war. I had, in 2000, when we were putting our documentary together, 2001, the guy who was the producer in New York who was trying to sell it to BBC wanted us to extend it, from 60 to 90 minutes, the documentary Sanders and I had done. And so he said, Jack, he calls me one day, you won't believe the conversation I just had. I said, what's that? He goes, we're hiring a new technical director, right? We get this guy in from MSNBC. He said, we're sitting on a rooftop deck. We see an airplane go overhead. And then I started talking about Flight 800, our video. He goes, then the guy says, the tech director says, I saw the video. And then our guy says, you saw Silence, our documentary? He goes, no, I saw the video. He says, I was working at MSNBC that night. I said, we showed it 2 or 3 times. 3 guys in suits came in, threatened us with their lives, and they took every copy we had. And then I said to Steve, the guy, our producer, I said, we got to get this guy on tape, because we have to extend the video in any case, right? And so he goes, I'll ask him. They hired him. So he had some power over him. He said, no way will he ever talk about this either on tape or to you, I said, oh, come on, go back and hire him, fire him, threaten to fire him. No. He wouldn't do it. That's it. But we know the video's out there. And like I say, the best guy I talked to was this guy in Hong Kong who watched it 50 times. And he's a 747 pilot. And he explained it and described it in exquisite detail. And his wife backed him up. So we know it's out there. There's probably a copy, kicking around in Hong Kong. You can find that.
The reason that I mentioned it is I'm sure there's a way to actually have the video. You could try to triangulate exactly where it
Yes. Yeah, you could. And it's if you really, I think if we did that with the July 12th one, would give us a good idea too. Yes, ma'am. Last question.
You said Jim Sanders and his wife were arrested?
Yes.
Were you ever threatened or arrested?
No. No, and that's, I get asked that a lot, and that's a good question. But the problem, they threaten you if you have first-hand information. That's why people like Monica Lewinsky were in such a day. I think Linda Tripp saved her life, but, she could have disappeared. What happened with the Sanders is James was in Elizabeth, and this is how I got involved. This is the last story. I'm going to let you guys get out of here. Elizabeth was a trainer for TWA. She was a Filipino-American, really agelessly pretty woman. She'd been a former Polynesian dancer. And there were 53 TWA employees killed. She was going from memorial service to memorial service. She was really, just beside herself. She was at one of these services, and the TWA manager for all of the hangar, for all the investigation, says to her, is your husband still an investigative reporter? She said, yeah. Could you introduce me? She introduces him. The first thing that Terrell Stacy, the pilot, says is, there's a cover-up going on. And so then Stacy and Sanders start to collaborate. And when Sanders goes public with his information, the FBI comes down on the 3 of them. Elizabeth had to go into hiding for a year, because they still didn't know who Stacy was. They just knew he was inside the investigation. Because Sanders they had gotten material outside the investigation. They had first-hand knowledge. And so Finally, they caught up with Stacy. Elizabeth almost lost her mind. She was 8 months in a trailer park in Oregon. Then they tried James and Elizabeth for conspiracy, convicted them in a Long Island court that was not allowed to know that Sanders was a reporter. So they tried him as thieves for taking material from the investigation. And it was when I met Elizabeth that I first got interested in this. Because I said, if they could put this lady in prison, they could put your sister or your mother or, your daughter in prison as well. And her crime was introducing her husband to the pilot. That's all she did, her only role. And their punishment was worse, more severe than Sandy Berger's. So, hey, thank you all for coming out. I'm going to be selling books, so Lisa, thanks for coming tonight.